And this is our second of our virtual training for nonprofit series. If this is your first time, welcome. If this is your second time, welcome back. We're glad you're joining us again. Today we're going to be discussing board and executive director roles in the nonprofit. So we're glad you're here, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Judson, who has a few more introductions to make.
Good. Thank you, Neely. Yeah, the Community Foundation is so pleased to be able to partner with the Junior League to provide this series of 5 sessions to the nonprofits, whether it's the executive directors or other staff or volunteer board members in our region. And we're excited today to have people not only from Calcasieu, but from some of our other parishes in the area as well. And hopefully that
He started gonna make Joseph fast.
Reminder to mute if you're not the current speaker.
He's trying to figure out how to make Joseph fast. Joseph just needs to shut up.
I'm going to mute all,
Okay.
and then I'm going to unmute you, Sarah. There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
The Community Foundation, as you can see on our slide, and what we like to say is we're about connecting people who care with causes that matter. And I think doing these sessions is completely in line with that, of all of you, whether you're staff or volunteer board members that are committed to the mission of your organization, and you want to be able to connect with those people that also care about that cause. And so that's what we're doing, is training to help us improve our skills and our knowledge in doing that. And thank you to the many people that participated last time. I wanted to give a few highlights of the survey responses, which we appreciate many of you sharing. Some of the key takeaways were that thank yous are so important, and that people, of course, know that. It just really reaffirmed that it is a good strategy to be disciplined about and to make yourself do that, whether it's writing notes or making phone calls. And also another trend in the takeaways was that it is very appropriate and a great way to engage board members in having them be ones to do thank yous. So it seemed like a lot of us got that as a takeaway. And then also the importance of having an elevator speech and having that be something that all of the board members and staff at every level know what that is and can easily articulate it to other people out in the community. And being strategic, creating the plan and following the plan. And then one of the things that really stuck out to me was that creating and working the plan is not hard, but it takes discipline to actually do it. So that part I have in all caps, the discipline part. So that really resonated with me, and apparently a few other folks too. So a few housekeeping issues for today. One is that the questions that some of you suggested in the survey, we have captured those, and Beverly will do her best to include those as we go about the session today. So thank you for that. And the chat box will be live, and so we encourage you to use that method to ask questions or make comments, and we'll be monitoring that and hopefully be able to include all those questions at the end. And if we're not able to, then we will make arrangements to be able to respond over time to your questions. And also the sessions are being recorded, and our first session is already available on the Community Foundation and Junior League websites. So each one will be. So if you need to sign off a little early today and want to be able to take part of, hear it later, or if you like it so much and know it's valuable and want to share it with others, that's available to be able to do that. And now I'm excited to be able to introduce the 3 people that will be sharing today. Beverly, many of you heard last time, but for those of you who might be new today, Beverly Thompson is a PhD and has an additional letters behind her name as well. And she is both a published academic and practitioner in the field of philanthropy. She's held senior executive positions at LSU. And in part of that time, Laura Leach, one of our panelists today, was the board chair.
You what?
And And then Beverly also worked with Women's Hospital with their foundation. And then with her work at Carter Global that she does today, she has clients ranging from Sun Devil Stadium to the Carnegie Museum systems, as well as the local chapter of the Boy Scouts. And she has helped organizations raise over, get this, $1.7 billion during her career. So we are very fortunate to have her sharing training methods with us here in Southwest Louisiana. And we'll turn it over to her in just a minute. But before that, I want to introduce our panelists. First is my friend Kay Barnett. And Kay and I actually got to work together at Christus, as well as in many volunteer roles, including the Junior League. She is the executive director of the Christus Ochsner Southwestern Foundation. And she is also our region's only CFRE, which is a certified fundraising executive. And she has certifications also in plan giving, capital campaigns, and major gift fundraising. So we're real pleased that she is able to share with us today the expertise and experience she's had. And we're so excited that she invited, and Laura Leach is able to join us today. I think when you think about philanthropists in Southwest Louisiana, one of those first names that comes to mind is Laura Leach and her family. And we so appreciate their many years of commitment to so many good causes. And one of those is the Christus Health System. She's been on the board of directors of Christus Ochsner's Foundation here since 2016. And before that, she served as the lead gift chair for their campaign. And that is part of what they'll talk about today. I know that one of her favorite other organizations is LSU. And so she and Beverly did have the chance to work together there in her many capacities. And one of those now, Laura still serves on the Tiger Athletic Foundation board. So even as an Ole Miss alum, I'm really happy that she does so many good things for the state. So
she's an Ole Miss grandmother, if I'm not mistaken. No, she's a Mississippi State grandmother. Well, I stand corrected.
Yes, but you caught it.
I
So we're so happy to have Kay and Laura with us today. And Beverly, I will now turn it over to you to start our session.
Well, first and foremost, let me thank the Junior League for having me. I am such a tremendous fan of the league and the training that it does for not just women, but for community leaders. And I think it is so extraordinary and so important. And in fact, I'm on the advisory board for the local Junior League here in Baton Rouge, where I happen to live. And I am so grateful for that. And of course, the Community Foundation of Southwest Louisiana, which is such a champion in Southwest Louisiana for multiple causes, so huge. And I have to tell you, very rarely do you get to work with two women that you consider your sheroes, not heroes, sheroes. And when you talk about philanthropy in the world among those of us who work in the space, there are a few names that always comes up, and one of those is Kay Barnett, and she is legendary in the field. So even those of us who have worked and played in the field for a long time get a little starry-eyed and intimidated when Kay is on the line. So I'm so excited to have the opportunity to visit and interview Kay today. And when you talk about philanthropy, and at the risk of a correction, I would not say in Southwest Louisiana. I would say in all of Louisiana, when somebody talks about philanthropy in the state and who really exemplifies leadership, Laura Leach is always top of the list. And I am so grateful to have been able to work with Laura as when I was the director of the Forever LSU campaign. She was on the board of supervisors, but she was also on the board of the LSU Foundation. So she was a double boss for me. And as a young professional and frankly a young professional woman in the field, I was so grateful to have Laura wave me over in great big board meetings and say, "Come sit here shoulder and nudge me and give me confidence and courage in the space. So what a treat to be able to have Laura on the phone. So excited to present to you, and at the risk of keeping two amazing women holding, I would like to define for you today and talk about board versus executive director roles. And board members generally don't change their titles. Sometimes they're board of directors, sometimes they're board of trustees. In the leadership role inside of an organization, sometimes these do change titles. It might be an executive director, it might be a CEO of a foundation, it might be a vice president of development or development officer. It might just be the person who shows up to fundraise, but the person in charge of fundraising is how we're going to define this. And today's objectives, what I really want to accomplish for you all today is really describe the various roles and responsibilities of the board of directors and how those differ from the executive director role. So I don't have to change the language all the time. I'm going to call all of those roles executive director. So I really want to describe what their mission, a vision, and values should be, and what the various roles, real task-oriented job is. And then we're going to have a panel discussion, and I get to ask all the questions. But that being said, we do have a chat, and we are going to ask you to use the chat today to ask your questions, because this is a kind of an odd one-way format, and we want it to be interactive as possible. And Sarah is going to moderate some of those questions for us. So as I talk, please don't hesitate to ask some questions, and I'm going to try and answer them along the way if I see them, but we will definitely get to them. And when we get to the panelist portion, we want to give you the opportunity to ask your questions in a safe space. So a little bit about Carter. Carter is an international fundraising firm. We are in 14 countries. We work coast to coast here in the United States, and our clients, like Sarah said, range from everything from local Boy Scout chapters to YMCAs to general nonprofits to great big institutions of higher education and healthcare and performing arts, and that's everything from World Vision down to the local, dog shelter and every expertise in between. And I just happen to live in Baton Rouge, but I work coast to coast. And when I hang up the phone today, I actually have a client call in California. So at any given moment, we're on duty. Our service offerings, we're a comprehensive firm. We focus on fundraising, we focus on organizational planning, we focus on governance. My particular specialties happen to be in capital campaign development, council and management, and board governance. So we're right in the middle of my wheelhouse. In fact, I'm hoping, you heard I'm an academic, I'm hoping to teach a board management class at the university level, because I think it's one of the things that is most overlooked when people are getting degrees, is how do you manage a board in the nonprofit space, because we teach you how to do everything else, but we forget that board management is a big piece of it. And you will hear me say, fundraising's easy. People are hard. And people knowing who is in which seat of the bus and which way the bus is going is important. A little bit more about Carter, and you'll have these slides about the type of work that we do, just so that you have it. But let's get into the meat of this conversation. What is board development, and what are those individual roles when we're really talking about it? And for those of you that were on the phone last week, you'll remember that successful outcomes only come with shared mission, vision, and values. And inevitably, people ask, who's responsible for setting those? And the answer is yes. All of the people have to carry the mantle of shared leadership, planning, and governance. So everybody needs to understand what their roles are. But we really want people talking from the same page, if you will. So the board has a very significant responsibility in setting those mission, vision, and values. The leadership of the organization, i.e. those that are paid in leadership positions, carry that mission and vision. But the development office, if you are lucky enough to have an individual development office, anybody in programs and services, and anybody in operations and administration, all are essentially responsible for the shared mission, vision, and values. And one of the things I ask on first fundraising in a group when we go into an organization, when we have all the employees and hopefully some of the board members, is who's in charge of fundraising, and everybody always looks at the executive director or the development staff, and that's true, but everybody in the room should raise their hand. Every single person in an organization that is a nonprofit is responsible for the development of an organization. And sometimes that is articulated in different ways, but we all have to be singing from the same sheet of music. How do we do that? Well, here are some of the things that you need to consider. What is the mission, vision, strategy, and related plan for an organization? Does everybody in the organization know that? Well, having been in the hospital space, you know, you wear those fancy badges that tell everybody who you are because it's the law that you have to identify yourself. But I was always proud to work for an organization that listed the mission of the organization, and on the flip side of my badge, I had the values. And at any moment, any employee could be stopped in the hallway by a person in leadership and be quizzed. What is the mission and vision and values of the organization? And we could all rattle it off. Now, that sounds a little silly, but you know, we talk a little bit about branding and fundraising, and there's a reason some of the most well-known brands in the world have such name recognition. So Coca-Cola. Everybody in the world understands the symbol of Coca-Cola. Even if they can't read English, they know that the script Coca-Cola is Coca-Cola. Everybody knows that a swoosh is Nike, right? And if I said, what does the swoosh stand for? Everybody on this call would probably say, just do it. Well, Coca-Cola and Nike still brand, right? They don't stop advertising because everybody knows who they are and what they do. The same is true for your organization. So every person within the organization needs to be able to talk about the mission, vision, strategy of the organization. In leadership, the board and the executive director really need to be concerned with what is the market share, what are the market dynamics affecting growth. So what does that mean? That means, who's your competition? And do you have any competition in the space? And although I don't believe in the words fundraising competition, because the word philanthropy means love of humankind, and there's a lot of love in the world, let's be frank, there are a limited amount of dollars in the world. And sometimes nonprofits are competitive in the space. So understanding what lane you're in is really important. And what are the market dynamics affecting growth? So for example, right now, if you're a performing arts association, market dynamics affecting growth could be, we can't open our doors right this second. For Christus Ochsner, that may be, gosh, we've got COVID happening and we are full to the gills. So what are some of the market dynamics affecting your growth right now? Some people may be in a slow mode and some may be in a fast mode, but you need to be watching that, not just on an annual basis, but on a monthly and a quarterly basis. Most importantly, how does the board function in relation to governance? Who's in charge and what are the rules? Frankly, if something goes wrong, how does the board function in relation to human resources? How do they solve conflicts? What is the shareholder communication? And when I say shareholder, that is really, who are your constituents? How are we communicating to those that have invested in our organization and or have some type of responsibility with us? And what are the values and ethics? So one of the things that trips nonprofit boards up is the difference between legality and ethics. Something could be legal, but it might not be ethical. Something could be legal, but it might not be ethical. So somebody donates to your organization, they want to stay anonymous, you publicize that. Is that illegal? No. Is it unethical? Yes. And what policies and procedures are in place for you to govern those? How do you recruit, retain, compensate, and attract talent? And is that really a board decision, or is that an executive director? How do we report community impact? Are there risks to our organization? What are the fiscal risks? What are the reputational risks? What are the compliance risks to our organization? So we're going to talk about this a little bit further here. Questions to consider. I always like to say it this way. If your organization were to cease to exist, who wouldn't be served? If Christus disappeared in your community, what gap would happen? What constituent base would be gone? What is the role of philanthropy in making sure that Christus stays operational so that those people are served? For what purpose do we want to raise philanthropy's profile? Is our staff board positioned to succeed in meeting our financial goals? So part of the board and executive director's responsibility is, do people have the tools to actually do their job? You can set financial goals all you want, but do they have the people, processes, systems in place in order to meet the goals that you set for them? And are you soliciting feedback? What can our governing board do to support our organization's philanthropic efforts to make them even more successful? If I ask the question, how many of you would like to understand how to better engage your board and how to get them more engaged in the fundraising, 99% of you would raise your hand. The number one reason that we're hired to do a board retreat is because of unengaged boards. Whose responsibility is that? The answer is yes. It's everybody's responsibility. How do we integrate philanthropy into our organizational financial planning? I was with a client day before yesterday, and they said, how are we going to set our budget for next year? And it's a university that produces medical graduates. Well, we're in uncertain times. That's a really hard thing to do. Last year, they raised 151% more than their budgeted year. So their actual dollars raised were 151% higher than their regular budget set year. And my response was, I think you should keep your budget flat. And the answer, and the question was, does that go to the budget or the actual? Is that the budget that we set last year, or is it the actual dollars? And I said, well, we have to do financial modeling, and you are in very uncertain terms. You don't know what your enrollment's going to be. You don't necessarily know if students are coming back, not by your choice, but by their choice. So in the financial modeling of that, they need to be very conservative with their budget. But with 151% over their budget, going back to what their budget was this time last year is probably a good decision for that particular organization. You know, there are some rules of thumb that you should have a percentage over whatever you raised last year. Well, in the market share and the climate that we're in, they needed to have that discussion. It's not just up to the philanthropy office. It's not just up to the executive director. That's got to be a board decision, because 6 months from now, in their halfway point, the board is going to be asking questions. So keeping them informed is going to be important. How do you measure and monitor your performance? In fundraising, I would suggest it can't just be about the money in the door. It has to be based on other metrics. How are you filling your pipeline? How are you acquiring donors? And board members need to be asking some of those questions, not just the end goal of performance, not just the dollars. So let's talk about the leadership roles and what each leader's actual job is. So the board president's role. As the board president, you are selected, you may be elected into that, but their primary role, the primary role of the board president is to set the mission, vision, and values of the organization and to uphold them. In addition to that, they are in charge of governance. They have to make sure that the organization follows its own rules and its own procedures. Now, board members take fiscal and legal responsibility for the organization in most cases. What that means is, if something goes wrong, they are financially liable. If something goes wrong, they are legally liable. So governance becomes very important. In a court of law, can you defend your governance? Did you follow the procedures that you set out in your bylaws to follow? In addition to that, the board chair has to set the tone. Do you show up on time? Do you show up? Do you build a great team and empower them to be successful? Do you recruit board members and hold them accountable? So the board chair sets the bar on that. The way a board chair should be setting a bar is setting meeting dates and agendas in accordance with your bylaws in advance, not pop-up meetings, but here's the year of board meetings, here's the date, here's the time, and here's what's going to be discussed in each board meeting. And different seasons call for different actions. So at a certain point of year, board members should know that that's the time for nominating. They should know that it's time for financial review. The board chair also has the great luxury and responsibility of assigning committees. This is a great way for a board president to find their successor. They also send the agenda and the meeting materials in advance. Now, another thing that I know for sure is that if the executive director is writing the board agenda and writing the meeting materials and doesn't get the blessing of the board chair, the wrong person is running the meeting. Feedback is really important on this. And it is important that your board take a very active role in this. The other thing that the board chair has to do is create a culture of trust and respect. Making sure that everybody is held accountable, but also that rules are followed. And the way that you do that is kind of like you parent, if you will. We set our expectations, we model behavior, we give feedback, and we hold our own selves accountable. And that really helps create a culture of trust. When people can jump leadership, that's when trust is broken, usually. Or when we don't follow our own rules, the trust gets broken. The board president also needs to really be the person asking the questions about market share, and market dynamics. They really need to ask questions, and they don't have to know all the information, but they need to be asking the question of the organization. Who are our competitors? Are there any threats to our organization? What are some of the strengths and the weaknesses and perhaps opportunities? They need to know who their customer base is, and frankly, the last two are the most important. They need to be reading the financial documents. When boards are surprised that an organization is in financial challenging situations, shame on them. Because if they're asking the right questions and really pressing for the information, the executive director shouldn't feel like that's punitive. They should feel like that's their job. That should be a symbiotic relationship. The board is taking fiscal responsibility. What that means is they're financially responsible. They should be asking these questions. I always say it's the get out of jail question. They need to make sure that they're asking the question so everybody is doing the right thing at the right time. And legal questions certainly need to be asked and answered. And a board should be asking those questions. So don't get intimidated if somebody asks that of you from a board. They also have to organize for effective engagement and engage stakeholders effectively. They know who their peers are, they know what those market shares are, and they need to be engaging those stakeholders in ways that are meaningful for the organization. Now, board president role in fundraising. So the board president's role in governance is a little bit different than it is in fundraising, but there's some significant overlapping. So they lead and set the organizational philanthropic priorities. They say these are the priorities of the organization specifically. What could be met through philanthropy? What can be met through earned income? What could be met through revenue generation if you have the luxury of that? But they need to be setting those priorities. Through your case for support, you will remember we talked about a case for support being the what I call the so what document. What are you going to raise money for? The who, what, when, where, what, how much of the organization towards the priorities. They need to give. The board president sets the temperature of the rest of the board. They need to give, and they need to give proportionate, and they need to give first. Now, what is proportionate? I like to use the words equal sacrifice. We don't necessarily need to assign, oh, Beverly's going to give this and Laura's going to give this and Sarah's going to give that. We don't do that when we pass a plate in church or synagogue, but we do need to have equal sacrifice, and it needs to be proportionate to the role. They also need to help identify others who can give. So part of that role is to do prospect identification for people. Here are some other people that I think would be interested in this organization. They need to cultivate potential leaders and potential donors. People give to organizations in different ways. Y'all will remember that last week we talked about people will give their influence, they will give their reputation, they will give their time, they will give their resources, and they will give their money. Very frequently, board members are approached and say, gosh, I would like to do this for the organization. So it's up to the board chair to help the organization move those relationships forward. And they're the primary spokesperson. They need to ask others to support and engage in the organization. And they have to provide stewardship. And then the word stewardship here means they're part of the thank you. And we talked about writing thank you notes last week. That is a tremendous blessing of the organization. But part of that is showing up on perhaps the dais when the gift announcement is made. Don't forget your board chair. They need to speak. They need to say thank you. So does the chief executive officer of the organization. But there's nothing like peer-to-peer asking, and there's nothing better than peer-to-peer thinking. So one of the questions is, how do we engage our board members at a more significant level? Well, absolutely engage them in the stewardship opportunities of that. Now, what is the difference between a board chair's role and a board member's role? Well, first and foremost, a board member needs to understand what you're asking them to do. I've been asked to serve on several boards, and a few of them have some weight. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that one, I was asked by a dean in a hallway during a football tailgate, hey, I want you to serve on my advisory board. Will you do that? Well, I think I might need a little bit more information. What is the time commitment? What is the financial contribution expected when, what is the average gift of board members? Am I willing to carry the mantle of this particular organization? Board members need to understand that on the front. They also need to help the organization set those philanthropic priorities with the board chair. They also have to give. They have to give proportionate, and they have to give first. And right now, in our climate, 100% board giving is the number one way that foundations are splitting grant applications. If an organization, no matter how often and no matter how frequently they have supported, does not have 100% board participation, foundations are literally separating the herd. They're saying, didn't have 100% participation, they're going in the no pile, period. Now, why is that? Because if you are taking fiscal and legal responsibility and you're not willing to give and give a proportionate value to the organization, what does that say to other potential donors? Why should they give if board members aren't giving? So again, they need to help identify others who can give and cultivate potential leaders and donors. Great way to include board members is in employee engagement programs. You know, help get board members to help celebrate staff. If you have a staff member of the month club, get a board member to show up and hand them that plaque. How exciting, and how fun for both. It's celebrate. A, it's a hero showing up, and B, it engages the board in what you're doing in a different way. So whether it's a student campaign, a faculty staff campaign, an employee campaign, a physician campaign, whatever that is for you, are you engaging board members in other ways? Donor engagement at programs and at meetings. Every time you call a board member, it shouldn't be because there's a problem or you're asking for money. Give them other ways to engage with you. Give them ways to invite others to participate through either events or lectures or opportunities, trainings. And those kind of meetings, and ask others to engage in the organization. And of course, board members have the opportunity to provide stewardship. I said it last time and I'll say it again. One of my favorite things to do is to participate in the Thankathon and get my list of people and thank the people that have donated to the organizations that I serve on boards for. I also love having my little note cards from different organizations and having the opportunity to say thank you in different ways. And frankly, I like showing up and being around my other board members. So if somebody is having an event or thanking somebody else for a major gift announcement, I want to be there to say thank you and shake their hand. Now, fundraising expectations for board chairs and for board members to spread the good word. And in order to spread the good word, are you scripting them? Are you telling them the great things that are happening in the organization? Are you giving them feedback? One of my favorite things to do with board members at each board meeting, when I was the president of the hospital or the executive director of an organization, was to start each meeting with a 3-minute board minute and have each board member say to the rest of the group, give me 3 minutes on why you're sitting in this room. Why is, for example, I was the president of Women's Hospital Foundation. Hey, Sarah, could you give 3 minutes at the next board meeting of what Women's Hospital means to you and why you're serving on this board? And they practice that and they rehearse that. And y'all have heard of that thing called an elevator speech. Well, you're teaching them to evangelize for you in the board meetings. And if they get comfortable doing that around each other, invite them to do that to larger audiences. We have to cultivate through engagement. We need to be a little fun about how we do that. We want people speaking from the same voice. So repetition is a big deal. Feed them information. Here are 3 amazing things that happened this month and inside of our organization. Some of those can be public and the gift announcements and things like that, but tell them about the amazing nurse that did something. Give them the stories. Tell them about the student that was served so that they can tell that story. We want them to honestly be able to convey feelings and attitudes in-house. If something's not going well or they have a sense of something, we want that trusted face and them to give us, in some cases, maybe difficult feedback, but we need to be friendly with our board members. we want them to be ambassadors, and frankly, we want them to deal with conflict. We don't want them to be surprised by conflict, so keeping them informed is important, but deal with conflict. Now, fundraising expectations. This organization is your number one philanthropic priority. I'm going to say that one again. This organization is your number one philanthropic priority. When I would invite board members, I would ask them what other boards they served on. I did not want resume builders. I wanted people who were going to be all in with my organization. Now, some people serve on multiple boards, and that is fantastic if they have the time, the talent, and the treasure to do so. But if you are headed to a major campaign, board member, I would suggest sometimes there is a rotation of when this particular organization and the organizations that you serve need to be your philanthropic priority. So asking a board member, if I'm not in your top one, are we in your top 1, 2, or 3? And if they're not in your top 1, 2, or 3, you might need to have a mutual agreement that maybe it's time to part, because you want people that are all in with you. Again, make a proportionate gift, identify other prospects, cultivate and engage potential donors, solicit on behalf of the organization, steward the process. You see how we're saying the same things over and over? Well, it's important to say it out loud, not in a hallway at a football game. It's important to sit down with somebody and invite them in a very serious, informal way to be your board member and lay out the expectations. As part of building the trust, it's also part of building the accountability. This is the expectation. We expect you to do these things. We expect you to attend meetings. We have a meeting attendance policy, and we take it very seriously. If you don't take it seriously in the asking, they're not going to take it seriously in the attending and in the doing. So, to recruit a board member, what do you really need to do? I would suggest you set a time and a meeting to visit with them. And when I say you, I mean you, the board chair, and or board member of choice, and you, the executive director. It's always best if a peer and the executive leader are in a room together having a conversation. Set the meeting. Say, hi, this is Kay. Laura and I would like to come have a conversation with you about the potential of joining our board. Are you open for us to come have that conversation? We're going to bring you some information to review and give you the opportunity to ask us any questions that you want. Are you open next Tuesday at 2? And when you come, list out for them the expectations. Have a dialogue with them about what it really means to be a board member at your organization. I would also prepare a packet that includes your articles of incorporation and your bylaws, as well as your last 990. Because if somebody is going to take legal and fiscal responsibility for your organization, and you're asking them to sign on the dotted line, what you're really asking them to do is to uphold the articles of incorporation and bylaws of your organization, and to take the financial responsibility for the next 990s, which are the tax returns that they're going to show up on. Also bring them an organizational chart and an overview of who your organization is and what they do, because they may know your brand, they may have stayed in your hospital or gone to your school, but do they really understand how the organization works and flows? And bring them a job description that outlines the expectations. And I say that because a job description details out, these are the expectations and the accountability that we have for each of our organization, for each of our members. Let them have a safe space for a dialogue about the time commitment. Don't pull a fast one on them. If you meet 6 times a year, but it takes 5 hours for the preparation for that meeting, let them know that. Let them know what the attendance policy is. Let them know, gosh, we expect 100% participation of our board members for donating. And the average donation of our board members over the last 3 years was X dollars. I'm going to say that again. Some of you may have a built-in board member contribution. So we have a minimum contribution of $1,000, or you may just say 100% contribution with equal sacrifice, but let them know where they stand. How do you do that in a polite way? You show them the annual report, and you show them any of your donor documents that say, you know, here are some of our donor reports, so that you can have a sense of that, and let them have a trusted space in order to ask either the board member and or the executive director, and be prepared with the information upon inviting. And ask them if they are willing to be an advocate, and show them the current brochures and the annual report. I say that because some people want to be very quiet about their leadership roles in organizations, and that is fantastic, and we appreciate that. But let them know we may ask you to appear in one of our brochures, and here's what that would look like, and show them what that brochure might look like. We might ask you to appear at our donor gift announcements, and this is what that would look like. Is that something that sounds reasonable for you? And set the organizational priorities. Let them know that these are our organizational priorities. This is our case for support today. Is this something that you could get behind, and something that you think you could feel passionate about? If the answer is no, that is a fantastic answer, because then you won't be calling me saying, oh my gosh, how do we get our board members more engaged? If you are upfront with them on the front end about what the role really is, you're much more likely to have them engaged with you moving forward. So here's a sample job description. Yes, you're going to get these slides. Feel free to cut and paste these. I've even left you the opportunity to search and replace for organization name, but the principal functions on your job description would be these things, and they're an overview of what we said before. Now, these are going to be unique to your organization, of course, but let them know this is what you're signing up for. They're signing up for, so they also aren't surprised with the accountability factor later. And let's be frank, the expectations must be reasonable, and some boards are bigger than others. I'll tell you, to serve on the board of directors of a major hospital is a very significant responsibility. In many cases, to serve on the hospital board is different than serving on the board of trustees, the fundraising board. One is a stepping stone for the other, or vice versa. But let people know what that really means in time and commitment. Let them understand what your challenges are. And the expectations are generally, we want you to lead with your influence, your philanthropic leadership, access, commitment, and history. And here are ways that you could donate with us: your time, your resources, your talent, your treasure, your influence, your reputation. Why are some administrators and board members and volunteers reluctant about these things? Well, rejection. It is very difficult to ask somebody to do something for an organization. It is much easier when you clearly spell out the expectations. We also don't want to damage relationships. You know, you're in a very small community. the board member of choice may actually be your very best friend that is nominated. I have been in that situation when I was the president of Women's Hospital, and one of the most engaged volunteers was one of my dearest friends who is an attorney. She's passed away now, but she knew I told this story during my trainings. She was an attorney. She was very active. She was very passionate about women's health and particularly solving cancer. Her sister had passed away from cancer. And I had to be very clear with the board chair that this person is a really, really close friend of mine. I think she would be an excellent choice for the board, but I need you to understand that this is a relationship issue with me. So, the person that I walk 3 times a week with and go to football games with is also going to be my boss. So, can you help me with that? I didn't want to take away from the organization, but in a really small town, that's a thing. The other thing is quid pro quo. I would suspect that between Laura and Willie Mount and some other people, they serve on multiple boards, and we frequently ask them to give and to ask others. Well, we need to be real cognizant of the fact that if we're asking them to ask their peers and their friends to donate to an organization, that their peers and their friends will feel very confident in asking them. Hey, Beverly, you asked me on behalf of the Boy Scouts to sponsor this table. I'm on the board of the Girl Scouts, and I'd like you to sponsor a table too. Well, remember when I said that if you make the request of a board member for an organization to be in their top 3 philanthropic priorities, that helps you in the quid pro quo because it arms your board member with being able to say, the Boy Scouts is in my top 3 philanthropic priorities. I have given to it. I'm very passionate about it. I serve on the board. I'm inviting you to participate with me. Would you be willing to give a gift of this level? Well, when Jane calls me from the Girl Scouts, I can say, well, you'll remember that the Boy Scouts is in my top 3 philanthropic priorities. And although I give significantly there, I absolutely will give to the Girl Scouts, but I am going to give it at a lower level. I'm going to be comfortable doing that here. We need to protect our board members from quid pro quo fundraising. Just because you gave to mine, I'm going to give to yours. We also need to protect their time. If the expectations that you built out for your board members are going over in meetings and time and challenges, you need to acknowledge that. So having an agenda, setting meeting times and adjourning on time, and not burdening them with multiple committee meetings outside of a major disaster are really important. And really a lack of understanding about the roles and expectations. Now, what is the president, CEO, executive director's role? Well, they serve as the chief fundraiser for the organization. They develop the vision, they set the objectives for fundraising, they support the chief development officer, they assist in recruiting board members and volunteers, and they take on a relationship role with the board, and they have to be visible and they have to set priorities. Let me be clear on this because I don't want to confuse you. Sometimes you are the executive director of the organization that is in charge of fundraising, and there is an additional president or CEO of an organization. Let me explain that. You might be the executive director or president of the LSU Foundation, but there is a chancellor and president that is in the CEO role. So if you are in the president CEO role, your job is also to fundraise, although the executive director's whole job is fundraising. So Kay's whole job, and you'll hear this later, is fundraising. The president of the hospital also has to be engaged in and singing from the same page of music, a mission and vision. So the bigger the organization, the more diced out the roles. So being really cognizant of that is very important. And again, it's really everybody singing from the same page of music. So executive directors, their role is strategic thinking, operational planning. This is the budget set for the organization. How are we going to get there? What are the people, processes, places for us to do that? Professional execution of that, setting the tone inside of the organization of what that looks like. And I would suggest rigorous evaluation of themselves and others, and transparency in that. Are we meeting the goals and objectives that we should? They're also responsible for the written operations plan of the institution, the solicitation strategy. Who is the right person at the right time with the right ask? That's your solicitation strategy. And imaginative solutions for a problem. If there is a problem, the executive director needs to inform the board, but just like any good manager, the board chair should be saying, what are your suggestions to making this right, or what are your suggestions for solving the problem? So don't just bring the board the problem, bring the board the problem with some imaginative solutions. I like to say, you're the writer and the board is the editor of these. And honest reporting. I have seen edited financials on multiple occasions of organizations that once the board found out, oh my gosh, we're in much worse financial shape than we thought, or gosh, we had an employee that we had a problem with that we didn't know. At some level, the executive director needs to know when to inform the board and keep them apprised of major information. So next steps. What are some immediate steps that we need to take to be more effective? I want you to think about these in your own organization. If you're the board president, what did you see in this presentation that you can immediately take away? When you're inviting people to join you on your board, are you providing them with the information that we talked about, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws? When's the last time you looked at them? Are you asking questions during the financial audit and the financial discussion? Have you asked about these things? As a board, are you asking about the fiscal and legal issues? Are you asking how you can be more engaged or offering opportunities? As a president and CEO, is that fundraising just somebody else's job, or is it something that you're taking an active role in? Not necessarily managing the day-to-day, but are you serving as the true leader of the organization? And as the executive director, are you keeping all of these people informed? I would suggest, are you managing up and looking at their job description and also helping them to hold themselves accountable? Hey, by the way, you know, we have an attendance policy. You've missed 2 of our last 6 meetings. If you miss another meeting, I'm worried that the board will have to take action. Have you reminded them? Do you have transparent communication? So vision, again, is bigger than any role. Again, unified messaging. The participation in and responsibility for a vision has to be shared across the organization. It is not heavier on any one of these. The board has to set, the leadership has to model, development and advancement has to execute, programs and services have to be in line with what those shared mission, vision, and values, and operations and administration processes need to be in support of the messaging that's coming out of the organization. So vision infused leadership, you heard this last time, truly identifies the needs or the threats. It identifies how is this organization, in this case for support, inspirational and transformational? Are our goals simply stated, and do they have tangible outcomes? Are we providing the tools and the resources necessary to our team, both up at the board and down in the depths of the organization, the tools and resources necessary to achieve their goals? As boards and executive directors, do we define a time horizon? Do we set tangible goals with benchmarks set in time? And are we providing clearly articulating investments in the requirements? So just because you want to grow and just because you want to raise money, are you investing in the professional development and the systems and the infrastructure in order to meet those goals? Is your case for support compelling? What is central to your mission that you can't do now, but you could do with more private sector income beyond annual fundraising? This is a question that boards need to be asking each other and asking the executive director. And the executive director needs to be reminding the board that although you're taking responsibility in the governance as a fundraising nonprofit organization, we need your help in defining the case and frankly being the greatest ambassadors and evangelists, if you will, for the organization. So I ask each of you, whether you are paid by the organization or a volunteer to it, how do you want to spend your blank, your time, your resources? How do you want to spend your influence? How do you want to spend your reputation? How do you want to spend your money to this organization that's meaningful to you? At fundraising, we call that the magic question. These are the ways that you are going to engage your board members and others in the community to join you. So I want you to seriously write this down and think through. How do you want to spend your time, your resources, your influence, your reputation, and your money to this organization that is meaningful to you? This is the number one question you can ask in fundraising. And you really, as a board chair or as a board member, need to be asking yourself, am I in the right place? Am I in the right seat? And am I willing to make one of these my top philanthropic priorities to this particular organization at this particular time? And that's it. I am going to stop the share here. And I am going to unmute Sarah, and I've got to find you. I'm going to unmute Miss Laura, and I'm going to unmute Kay. And I am hoping as we talk, Kay, I'm having a hard time finding your name. There you are. I'm hoping that we can have a talk. Okay, make sure you're unmuted. It's not, unmute Kay. I'm gonna unmute all of you, and then I'm gonna ask everyone to mute themselves that is not speaking. How's that? Okay, so Miss Laura, are you with us? Y'all old habit. I can't.
I am.
Excellent. Well, Kay, I would like you to talk a little bit about how do you look for and how do you vet board members?
Well, first, I want to thank you all for inviting me today. I'm very excited to be here amongst fellow fundraisers and to really talk about the fun in fundraising. So let's get started on your question. So for us, that starts with the nominating committee. We look at our service area. And for Christus, it's the 5-parish area. And we look at the economy, and we want to structure our board that mirrors the major industries in our economy. So if you think about like insurance, banking and financial, education, our congregation, energy, utilities, our oil and gas industry, that includes LNG, real estate development, government, healthcare, hospitality, tourism, and lending and mortgage, and also industry supporting companies. So we make sure, now we have a large board, 25 members, so we make sure that all of those areas are represented on the board.
Wow.
And then when we have openings, we say, okay, where are those gaps? Which makes it much easier for the nominating committee to say, okay, and for example, this year we have 5 openings. And so we need someone in the legal field, another one in healthcare, someone in hospitality, investments, and industry, specifically pipeline.
So, Kay, is the reason that you're doing the cross-populated, if you will, based on different employment sectors, because you want people to have different reaches in the community from a fundraising perspective? How does that work?
Absolutely. You know,
Okay.
they're very connected to their companies, and they also have their personal connections.
Okay.
So the nominating committee is able to brainstorm names in those areas. They can narrow them down. We usually do 3. The nominating committee is very, very willing to contact these nominees, you know, candidates, and then ask them to join the board.
That's great. What do you provide them as information in order to do that? How do you arm your board members to make that ask? What kind of information do they need to have?
Well, first of all, we spend a lot of time educating our board members. I mean, I just feel like the communication with them, we do a very good job of that. So I wouldn't say that any board member is in the dark about what we're doing.
Yeah.
This committee, they're very versed in how to do it. You go back to your elevator speech
Yeah.
and why they're on the board and what engages them, what it means to them, how it's made a difference in their lives.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Miss Laura, if I can ask you, how do you make a decision about whether or not you're going to serve on a board? Because I know in the state of Louisiana, of the 500,
speaking on a conference call that I'm supposed to be attending.
okay, friends, everybody mute. Of the 500 different nonprofits, I would say 499 want Laura Leach on their board. So how do you make the decision about which boards you're going to serve on?
That's a very interesting question. It has to be a board that is of interest to me. It has to be a board that is active. And a lot of times you'll find boards that don't represent the community. So you have to, it has to be a board that has more than just men of age on it. It has to have a variety of culture, of sex, of age, etc.
So diversity matters.
Diversity does matter to me. And I've actually served on a couple of boards where it was all old men and me. And I was actually heard them say I was their token female member. That did not go over very well. And so my answer to that was, well, let's just see how token I'm going to be, you know. And so I think diversity is a huge importance, but also it depends on what that board is, what the object of that board's business is.
That makes perfect sense. Well, Kay, back to you. After the asking is done, how do you orient a board member? Once they're on the board, how do you get them acclimated to the culture that they're about to enjoy?
So once they're called by the board member, I always follow up with the call for myself and talk more about the foundation so to make sure that they want to serve. And I also, write them a thank you letter. And then I established a date for the new board member orientation. So we talk about, of course, the mission. And I say really the who, what, when, where, why. So who we are, what we do, what's our purpose. When could go back to your history.
Yeah.
That's really important, Where? Well, where could be lots of things, but for us, it's like where, service area, who do we serve? And what types of healthcare do we provide?
Yeah.
And then why? Our mission.
Yeah.
So we spend time looking at governance, as you said, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws. And then we talk to them about the conflict of interest policy
Oh, I'm glad you said that.
and the board attendance policy.
Okay. Conflict of interest. You say those again. Conflict of interest.
Confidentiality and the board's
Attendance.
Board attendance. One of the things that I think is very important that Kay just referenced, conflict of interest policies are required by law. And to get through an audit, a board member has to sign a conflict of interest. And if there are any disclosures that need to be made, i.e. they own a company that may be doing business with a nonprofit. Now, some of you, that's not a big deal, but that can be a very big deal at a hospital or an institution. And in small communities, that's very hard to avoid. But sometimes you have to make sure that board members are not taking your donor list and using it for their own purposes. So that needs to be explicitly stated.
Yeah, and sometimes you talk about things, of course, the financials of the hospital and, our work and our outreach, what perhaps we're doing behind the scenes to spread what we're doing and advance what we're doing.
Yeah.
Our CEO sits on the board,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes he tells them a little bit more than I think he should tell them. Confidentiality is very, very important.
Yeah.
And then, we do look at the 990 and try to get them to a point where they feel comfortable coming on board.
Yeah.
Our first board meeting every year is in August. It's nice to have about a quick little meet and greet 30 minutes before that board meeting so that they can meet the new board members and the new board members can meet the current board members.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Laura, what are some of the things that you, in addition to diversity and that sort of thing, in an orientation process are important to you?
I think, first of all, you really need to understand what the mission of the board is and not only what the mission is, but who you'll be dealing with, but also what is your responsibility on this board.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times we get on boards and we don't think we're going to do anything. We're just going to sit there. And so it's very important during an orientation to find out what is expected of the board members.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can't be emphasized enough, that when you're looking for board members, that you are exactly honest with them about what is expected of them, whether they're expected to donate to that cause. That should be number one.
Yeah.
I don't think many people expect that, but on a lot of boards it is expected.
Yeah.
And then Kay has already brought this up about attendance at meetings. What is expected of you as far as attending meetings? That we all have times that we can't go, but also time element of the meeting. How long are we going to be here? And I am one stickler. You're going to stress. If the meeting is supposed to be at 5, let's start at 5. Not 1 minute after 5, not 1 minute before 5, but 5 o'clock. And there's no reason you cannot be through if you have structured your meeting correctly in an hour. and let people go on, because many people are busy and doing other things. They're family members and they want to be home, to be with their children for a little while. So I think all those things are really, really critical for boards.
Well, I appreciate that. And I hope you appreciate the way I'm going to say this. I have had the blessing of going to Laura Leach Etiquette School in board meetings. And what that means for me is, y'all, she is a stickler for starting on time. And let me offer this compliment. You will never find a more prepared board member than Laura Leach coming into a meeting. She comes ready, she comes engaged, she comes ready to ask questions. And I'll tell you what, the second time you attend a board meeting and you haven't done that, it's noted, right? And I think the preparation is equally important. So not just the time of the meeting, but are you reading the documents in advance in order to do that? And Laura,
And
you do it
on
amazing.
diversity on a board, remember ages, remember generations.
Yeah.
Try to have the different generations represented on the board. And if you think about you talking about the pyramid last
Mhm.
week, all right, so that younger generation gets engaged with events and annual giving.
Yeah.
And then they're not the ones who can give, major gifts yet. Then you have the, middle-aged, and we're the ones who can start thinking about maybe making a major gift.
Right.
And
right.
then you have the 60 plus, and they're looking at their wills, looking at bequests, looking
Legacy.
at maybe setting up to trust,
Yeah.
putting the foundation in as with a lead trust or a remainder trust.
Yeah.
And so that is what I think you're cultivating, even new donors, by having different generations on board.
That's amazing. Well, let me shift gears. One of the things that we're going to talk about in our session next week is campaigns and major gifts. And probably even more important than campaigns and major gifts is the preparation that goes into making the decision to go into a major campaign or into planning just for a major gift solicitation. Can you two talk to me about and tell the audience about some of the major decisions that you made going into your capital campaign, and what was the give and take of the board? So Kay, I'm going to start with you. How do you start with that? And Laura, what are some of the questions and maybe the role that you played as you were going into a major campaign?
Okay, first let me start with how important it is for the foundation director to sit around that table with the administrative group and develop the strategic plan. That way I can hear what the hospital needs and why. And then the foundation board, we overlay our strategic plan with that, and we determine where we want to focus our fundraising for that upcoming year.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years ago, it was determined that the hospital really needed to retool cardiology, oncology, and neurosurgery. And we're talking about new advanced technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so we said, okay, tell us about it. And they wanted us to raise $6 million. So the board said, okay, so we want two things. We want a feasibility study, and we want to make sure the hospital matches us dollar for dollar. So then it
Wow.
started becoming a $12 million campaign.
Okay.
And you talked about the case for support. That is absolutely essential. It has to be strong. It has to make sense. It has to tell the story. It's what we use as fundraisers to go out there and engage donors in what we're doing.
Right.
And then the case for support, the board looks at it, they vet it. And then we determine, we do the final document.
Right.
Then we have a consultant that works with us to do a feasibility study. And the purpose of that is to talk to people who are influential and affluent in the community and show them the case for support and ask them if they think this is something that is needed and would they support in some way. You don't ask them for money.
Mm-hmm.
And that they can come back and tell us, yes, that $6 million is out there, Well, for us, they came back and said 4.
I hear Laura laughing.
Yeah.
Talk about
So, Miss Laura, talk to me about that process and your role in that process. I would suspect that you were one of the members that either were presented that case for support or were part of that. So, talk to us about the role that you played in that.
Yeah. Actually, I came on with St. Patrick's in a fundraising capacity before I was ever on the board of directors of the foundation. And they put me in charge of the real big gifts, and which is a little bit frightening. Raising $5,000 from somebody is a whole lot different than going out and asking for $100,000 for somebody. But the one thing that I would say under any circumstances, no matter what you're trying to raise, you cannot go to a prospective donor unless you have already made a gift yourself to that. That is critical. And then you can go out, and they don't have to know how much you gave, but it is imperative. You can go out and say, won't you join me in making a gift to this organization? And then you can sit there and talk about why you made the gift. And again, they don't have to know how much it was, but there is no way you can go ask someone unless you have already made that gift yourself. That the other thing I want to say, you never can be absolutely sure what to expect when you go meet with a donor. In their demeanor, their dress, their conversation, and this happened to me. They may want you to, they may say, well, look, I'll make that gift that you're asking for, but I have a cause too, and I want you to give to my cause. And there you are. You have to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
So
How do you handle that? I mean, that is a really tricky situation, and I think executive directors and folks want to be able to protect you from that. How do we prepare you for that?
well, yes, it's hard to prepare you for it because you're not really expecting it.
Mhm.
And the best thing you can do is say, well, I need to know more about your organization.
Mhm.
So why don't you prepare some information for me and give it to me? And this is certainly something I will consider. That's why you're not saying you're going to give anything, but then
Right.
you can find out more about what they are asking for.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you are being asked, Laura, to go on one of those visits, what kind of preparation, what kind of briefing do you expect from Kay or other executive directors, presidents before you have that conversation? What are some of the tools that you need?
Well, I want to know several things about them. I want to know what they do. Are they employed? Are they self-employed? Do they own a company? Do they work at all? I want to know the name that they prefer to be called.
Ah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
important in
John.
South Louisiana, isn't it? Mhm.
John or Mr. Smith,
Right.
I also want to know what special interest they may have. So we can maybe find some mutual ground to talk about, be it maybe dogs, be it a special interest they have in a certain philanthropy, or it can be any number of things. And also I want to know any recent events that may have occurred to them that I may not know about, especially if they've lost somebody in the family or something of that sort.
Oh,
A lot
right.
of times we don't know those things. So I want to know that.
Yeah,
So
that
we do the
makes perfect
research to
sense.
try to equip her with that.
Mhm.
And that's very important to be able to have those kinds of conversations with potential donors.
I believe so. Laura, I want to say thank you for saying that you get nervous when making an ask. I think a lot of people on the phone might be a little surprised at that. I think regardless of who you are, it is intimidating to ask for
Oh, it is.
money.
It's hard. It's hard to do. It is not an easy thing to do. And uh, you have to really firmly believe in the organization that you're representing, and you need to know some facts about it and all that. But I don't mind doing it because the worst thing they can say is no.
Yeah.
And that's all right. That's their privilege to say that. And when they do, you thank them for their time and all. And who knows, maybe if you've had a wonderful visit and played with their dogs and done whatever, they may change their mind, and it may be a future thing. But yeah, it's not an easy thing to go out and raise money. It really isn't.
And sometimes on fundraising calls, and a lot of them, I bring the CEO. For those major gifts,
Mhm.
I can ask for the money, but who do they really want to give to?
Yeah.
They want to give to the CEO.
Yeah.
They want to give for the mission.
Yeah.
And the previous CEO we had came from a for-profit background. We were going on $1 million call, and I said, "You're going to do the ask." And he said, "How do you do that?" I said, "You just say, we'd like you to give $1 million, and we think this would work with your mission," and you don't blink.
Yeah.
Well, and may I interrupt a minute and also say that it helps us so much because the CEO really, really knows everything. And whatever questions they may ask that I may be stumped on, Kay doesn't get stumped very often, but I did.
Mhm.
But if the CEO is there, you've got your backup group. Everybody can back each other up, and that's good.
I think that's terrific. What are some instances that you have faced without disclosing anything that's confidential, that have been really hard decisions for the board, or some obstacles that, Kay, that maybe you've had to bring to the board and say, this is a board decision. This isn't a Kay decision. How do you handle that? And how do you know when to do that?
Well, for example, with the capital campaign, when they said, we see 4 million, we don't see 6. I mean, that was a hard decision for the board.
Yeah.
And they ended up saying, yes, let's try to raise the 6. And Laura raised $2.5 million, and we ended up having this wonderful thing happen where we were a beneficiary of a trust, and we were able to inject another about $1.5 million, and that made up the difference between the 4 and the 6. Of course, it's extremely important that you're very, very, very transparent with the board. And, we had something recently that we voted on that, I don't know, I wasn't so sure that I felt like, was that the best use of our dollars? And I did present it, not in a negative way, but to make them aware that what they were going to be funding was actually salaries for our school-based health clinics. But when you look at the outreach and the difference it's made and the numbers of students that use those clinics, it made sense. But there was this little thing in all of us about, paying for salaries. So the board voted to do it one time. We don't want to be this to be something that is reoccurring.
Yeah.
And so that was some good discussion around that. The board is very engaged, and I can tell you, they're going to tell you what they think.
Yeah.
Yeah, we-
Good.
Right. It's great.
Yeah, we do.
and the board members give all of the reports. I don't give the reports. It's committee.
Oh, really? Could
No.
you say that again for the people in the back? What?
I don't want a rubber stamp board. Okay. So our committees are very active, and they make decisions, and they make recommendations for the full board approval. And at the board meeting, they explain it and why they want to make that recommendation. The chair does. I'm always the backup. And then, questions are asked, and then the vote is taken.
Okay, I'm going to say that again. You do not, listeners, want a rubber stamp board. You want your committees writing their reports and reporting out. Your job is to facilitate the minutes, to set the agendas, have them approve that, and approve the minutes. You don't want them saying, "Wait, what happened 3 meetings ago?" when something goes wrong. You want them active and engaged, and I think that is a huge takeaway.
Well, thank you. We
Now,
do
may
kind
I-
of, we kind of script them on their reports, but, they were at the meeting and they understand the issue. So
Yeah.
they're good at doing that.
So what are your
Uh,
thoughts on that, Laura?
Well, there were a couple of things that occurred to me as we were talking, and when Kay was talking earlier about the 4 million versus the 6 million, and then we had really needed 12. When I was asked to be fundraising for this, I'll have to tell you that what made my decision for me was we were talking about 3 areas where I might need to go to a doctor, oncology, cardiology. And I thought if we can do this and have these services right here in Lake Charles, and I don't have to get on I-10 and drive to Houston, I am willing to do whatever it takes. This was so important to me. I would rather be at home. And this is what we were raising the money for, was to have these services so we don't have to go to Houston every time or wherever. I just think, I guess what I'm saying is your mission is so very important in fundraising, and it has to be made clear there. I know a lot of people who didn't feel that way, who
Right.
really didn't feel that way, but I do know a lot of people who did. And I thought that is so important, that the mission is made clear. And then, that you buy into it yourself, and then you can go out and try to raise that money.
Right.
And our campaign was called Healthcare and Hope Here at Home.
Here at home.
Here at home. Yeah.
So, Kay, did that come as something that y'all thought of, or did that come from feedback from your feasibility study or your board members? How did you
Feasibility study, case for support, and a great marketing team.
so you listened well, it sounds like. And you exceeded your goal, right?
We did. We raised $7 million.
That's
And
amazing.
Hospital matched 14. And let me tell you, it's so important when you're talking to potential donors that they know that you are supporting them from within your walls,
Right.
and that the community doesn't think we're going to them to raise 100% of the dollars.
Yeah.
And so we have skin in the game. That was huge. That went a very, very long way.
I think that, so leveraging matches, if you have an organization that's earned income, such as a hospital, that they're matching, that sort of thing. Laura, I want to put you on the spot if I
dear.
can. And you never ask a question that you don't know the answer to, but I don't know the answer to this. But having watched you and been in rooms with you, is it different to say yes to a $750 million campaign versus a $1 million campaign or a $6 million campaign, or is all money hard to raise?
All money is hard to raise. All money is hard to raise, no matter what it is. But I would definitely say yes. It's a little bit frightening when you think about it, and you think about this goal that's ahead of you, and what you need to do. But the good part about fundraising, one of the good parts about it, the people you meet, you just have no idea. They come in all sizes, shapes, kinds, dress, talk, interests. It's really, if you can get into it and just really enjoy it, it's a great deal of fun. And it doesn't matter whether you're raising 5,000 or 750,000. You can enjoy it and just go out and know you're going to meet some of the most interesting people that you've never met before. You may make lifelong friends too. You never know. So,
and that's the fun in fundraising.
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
especially when you have that great case for support. You
Yeah.
have that really good need, and how it helps with outcomes on healthcare for the patients, and how it drives physicians to want to be here in our area.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
huge.
and you've got to know that you're going to be successful. You have to go out there knowing you're going to be successful.
And how do you know that? Is that the mission? Is that the vision? Is that the case? Is that the plan? Is that the
That's all of
passion?
that. All of the above.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
the positiveness is so important in particularly in this. You need to be so positive about everything.
Yeah.
And especially the outcome and the benefit it is going to be to these people who are you're asking to give their money.
Yeah. How would you all, what advice would you give for driving accountability with your volunteer board members? You know, you two really know the score, but not everybody does. How from the executive director perspective do you set that accountability? And Laura, how do you model that? And or you've served as board chair. How do you let people know this is the expectation?
Yeah, well, we talk a lot, and every year, really, what makes a good board member and what the board roles and responsibilities are. And it comes from, supporting and understanding your mission, from that governance responsibility, that fiduciary responsibility,
Mhm.
them getting engaged in helping us select people who possibly we could call on, and that they are willing to give themselves. Again, they have skin in the game.
Mhm.
And I think they always understand that from the get-go.
Mhm.
And that's important to have that open communication. And then, of course, we report and talk about things at the board meetings.
Yeah. How about you, Laura? And whether it's Christus or somewhere else, how do you either model or nudge somebody about, hey, need you to step up? What does that look like from a peer perspective?
Well, you have to do it yourself first and be the leader with it.
Mhm.
You can't expect somebody to do something you're not doing. And if that's the very first thing is you have, I said this a while ago, you have to talk to them about joining you in making this gift or
Mhm.
in doing this activity or whatever. You have to be willing to do it yourself first before you can ask anybody else.
Yeah.
Uh,
And you have to be structured, and you have to do that.
Yeah.
You say you do what you say you're going to do, and you put that organization behind it. If
Yeah.
our strategic plan says that I'm going to talk with every board member twice a year, and we're going to talk about prospective donors and things like that, I do it.
Yeah. Okay. You do, and you have set timelines for that.
May I chime in with the
Yes.
question too related to that? So I know for a lot of us on the call today that are, executive directors and are also running the organization and fundraising at the same time. And often I think when we look at the nominating process, we're looking, like Kay said, about people from around the region and that do different, have different skill sets and different connections. But does everybody on a board need to have the role of fundraiser? Or is it a part of it, like maybe they're the event planner or the thank you team versus like Laura has done so well of being a part of the actual relationship building and the ask?
Well, my answer to that is they all have to be part of the fundraising. They have to buy in on the front end. They may not be the one to go meet with the donor, but they can open the door and say, I'm part of this. I support it. I'm so passionate about it. I want to tell you about it. And I want you to meet our executive director so that she can talk even more about what we're doing and why.
Mhm.
And then I can call that potential donor and schedule some time. And sometimes the board member wants to come and sometimes they don't, but getting that door open is the most important thing.
Yeah. What do you think, Laura, about that? Are there different roles for different people, and can fundraising be relegated to a committee, or is that everybody's responsibility?
Well, there are many people will tell you, I cannot ask for money. I just can't do it. I see
I don't
Sarah
believe him.
nodding her head. I mean,
I'm
they
teasing.
will not do that. But as Kay
No, I'm
said,
teasing.
there are some of us that can, and we don't mind going out and doing it, but it has to be, the whole board has to buy into this. They may not be the one person that goes and makes the ask, but they can also think of people who can be asked, open the door for you, tell them, we want you to know about this wonderful project that's going on that we don't think you know about, and I just think it's going to be so important to the community, and I want you to hear about it. There's so many ways that you can be involved in fundraising without actually being the person that goes and asks.
Yeah, that's a great point. I when people push back and say I am not an asker, I usually say, how do you feel about inviting? Are you an
Yeah.
inviter? Because you can invite somebody to participate in a different way. Hey, why don't you come to this amazing event that we're having? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the fundraising event. It could be the, the kickoff event or whatever. And I have very rarely gotten a no in that. On one or two occasions when I've gotten a no about the inviting, I have said, how would you feel about sitting in your office and doing some prospect research with me, really identifying other people in your industry that you might not be comfortable inviting or engaging, but perhaps you could give us some insight into how they might be interested in this organization. And almost always I've been able to find an avenue to engage somebody in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important, because so often the people that are actually doing the ask don't know that many, and they need someone to help them get that, tell them about these people, and then get that door open for you.
Yeah.
And most of the time, I just think the norm is that you don't have many lawyers around, but a board member, it's not their thing necessarily. I mean, fundraising has its own art and science to it.
does.
Most of the time, it's not the board member asking for the dollars. And if it is, I'll go with that board member. But most of the time, it's the CEO and myself, or a board member as well.
Yeah. How about the fun of an organization, Laura? I mean, what about organizations that only want you to ask for money? How would you like to be engaged that's different than just asking for money? What are ways that are meaningful to you to be engaged with an organization?
I'm not sure I understand your question. No.
If all we do is ask you to ask other people, are we doing ourselves a disservice?
Yes.
Okay. What are other ways that we can engage board members besides just the asking that you think are meaningful or that have been meaningful to you?
Well, again, everybody's different, and everybody comes from different backgrounds and from different work backgrounds, and there's so many different avenues out there that you can pursue. So, I think getting your board members to understand that they do have something they can contribute to fundraising without having to go out there and ask for them. They need to put their thinking caps on and dig way deep and come up with different avenues for you to pursue.
Yeah. So we have a question here, and it's always a tricky question. So I've used the terms equal sacrifice, particularly with boards that don't have a fundraising minimum requirement. They don't have a set give or get policy, for example. How do you go about figuring out what is an appropriate either ask or amount? And that's tricky, right? So Beverly's equal sacrifice might be $1,000, Laura's might be $5,000, Kay's might be $100,000. How do we go about finding those things out and encouraging people without embarrassing people?
Yeah. Well, we don't set an amount, okay? And it's important for them to figure out what makes sense for them as far as, one, what they can afford. But because this is one of their top 3 or their top 1 organizations, and what can I do to really feel like I've made a difference? For one, it might be 1,000. For another, it might be 5,000. But something that really they can experience giving and getting back in many ways and feeling like they made a difference. So we
Yeah,
don't.
also, I maybe shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. If you start high and you go in and ask, you go in and ask for a $50,000 gift, you're probably going to walk out of there with a $5,000 gift. And whatever it is, you must be so grateful to those people that wrote that check for you or will write that check for you.
Mhm.
You can't ever expect to get what you go in and ask for. So I would offer that you need to start high so you can go down, and really what you're wanting is a donation from them of some sort, and you hope it will be sizable. And there's another point. It depends on who does the asking. When people know that you are a person that gives and supports organizations, they're liable to give to you. It makes a very big difference who does the asking.
Mhm.
Right, it does. It really does. That's why many times the CEO is the one to make the ask. I'm talking about major gifts, okay, here. We're talking about a capital campaign.
We're talking about commas and zeros inside
Yeah.
of the dollars. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. That it depends. So we say in fundraising, for those on the phone, the right person at the right time with the right ask, and hopefully the right amount.
I would also say it's really good, and we brought this up several times, to have more than one person, at least 2.
Mhm. Oh,
Because we're all susceptible to forgetting things and not picking up on certain things, and the other one you can work like a tag team.
Yeah.
And
oh yeah.
Okay, I want to shift to a rapid fire of a few of the questions that people have asked, both last week and coming in on our chat. How long should board terms be in total years and numbers of terms?
Okay, we have 9 years, three
Total.
terms,
Okay.
9 years total, and then it's 3-year terms. We want to stagger the board where we have a third and a third and a third whose terms come up each year.
Okay.
So that we're going back, in our case, it would be 8 a year, and saying, okay, your 3-year term is up. Would you do another 3-year term? I mean, after 9 years, let's think about it, okay?
Okay.
Thinking about other things by then, right?
Would you agree with that, Laura?
yes, whether it's 3, 3, and 3, or 2, 2, and 2, and then you have to get off for a couple of years before you can come back on.
Okay.
As you know, there are people that really love to be on boards and love to stay there, but sometimes you need diversity, and you need to that just has to be a rule.
Mhm.
And
And it's a hard one. When you have when you have a Laura Leach on a board, it is hard to say goodbye. It is.
You need to check your term, Laura.
Right. Well, and Laura says, let me introduce you to my daughter, Mary. Right. Right. How many board members are too many, and how many are too few?
That's a great question. So our bylaws say 9 to 25.
Okay.
We usually were around 17.
Mhm.
When we started getting more involved in major gift fundraising, capital campaigns, that kind of thing, we started looking at going to 25 and having that really good diversity and mix of people from the different companies that represent our economy.
Yeah.
So 25 is pretty big. I've seen some up to 30, but we really have never had a problem getting quorum, and that's something you also need to
That's
think.
nice. Okay.
And you should always have an odd number of board members.
Wait,
And
say that again?
Odd number of board members.
Why?
and an odd number on your committees
Why?
because you don't want to tie.
There you go.
You want to be able to make a decision.
Yeah. And tiebreakers get written up in the paper, huh?
Yeah, they want me to break the tie, and I'm not going to do it.
Mhm. uh, Full disclosure, when I was the president of the foundation at Women's Hospital, we were deciding, we created the foundation, we're trying to decide board members. And so we asked a lot of people like Kay and Laura, how many board members, and we had some best practices. And at the end of the day, we walked down to the boardroom to see how many chairs would fit around the table.
Oh,
I'd like to tell you it was more sophisticated than that, but 17 was our max because 17 was how many could fit reasonably in the boardroom that had just been built and was hopefully going to be there for a while. And that seemed like a really good number. We gave ourselves some flexibility and we had board terms, but be thoughtful about that. I've seen some organizations that have 80 members on a board, and that's a lot of people to engage.
ooh, that is. That's too many.
We have a question from Amy with Autism Services about an advisory committee.
How does an advisory committee work, and should it be board members whose terms have expired or potential board members? And what I'm going to add, what does an advisory board do?
Okay, we have an advisory council, a community advisory council. We have about 17 members. These typically are people who really, they believe in your mission, but they just don't have the time to serve on your board. And we meet quarterly and we educate them on what we're doing. They are our eyes and ears out there. They are advocates for us. And many times we have people on the advisory council who we end up asking to serve on the board. We're cultivating them.
What do you have them do?
We have them really come to the meetings and talk about what we're doing and share with us what they hear out there. And so that we can say, okay, I'm glad we know about that, and then decide what we want to do with it. I mean, we invite them to all of our fundraising events. They can come volunteer for those. And, you know, they're not as involved as the board is, but they are a great addition to our outreach.
That makes sense. Laura, do you have any comments on advisory committees?
No, I don't.
So I would let the group know, if you don't want advice, you don't want an advisory committee.
Right, exactly.
Because that's literally what they do. They are engagement. Now, I would suspect most of you want to engage new and different people in different ways, but you need to give them something to do. So feedback on your case for support would not be out of the question. Hey, we're going to change the hours of operation. Can you tell us how that might impact? Or we did this event. Could you give us some feedback on what you're hearing in the community? Is this something that we should do again? So their capacity is advisory, but your job is to engage them and give them something that's meaningful and tangible to do. Different than a development committee whose job is to raise money. So again, make sure that they understand their expectations. I have served on an advisory committee and I thought I was on a development committee because I was not asked appropriately. I'll give you my advice all day long. People like to give you advice. I just didn't understand the expectation. So make sure you define that. Well, ladies, we have about 5 minutes left. I can't believe it has gone so fast, but is there anything that we didn't touch on today that you just, for the greater good of Southwest Louisiana, think is really important for board members and leaders in the nonprofit community to really take away from this? Anything that they need to know that we didn't cover?
I think we've covered everything. I would just reiterate again, and Kay is so good about this, that time, everybody's time is important. And when you have a board meeting, you must start on time and you must end on time, because these people, if they're good board members, they're busy people. They're doing lots of other things, and they need to go right on. And I think Kay will tell you, when we finish, most everybody gets up and leaves. There are very few because they're on their way on to something else that they're doing. I think time is critical, and being right on time is so important.
I agree. Kay, any last parting thoughts?
I just offer my services. If somebody wants to talk offline, be glad to do that. And I kind of wanted to talk, we don't have time, about COVID and how we're dealing with that and how we're looking at our fundraising. I think that might be a great topic at some of these, maybe if you can add that in there.
Next week, I promise, in relation to major gift fundraising and campaigns, we will bring this up. And Kay, if you have anything that you would like to share in that, we would love to move that. I'm sorry, I skipped over that. I got so excited about the comments. Ladies, so that we're getting comments, scrolling, great information. Can't wait to share. Thank you, Kay and Laura. This has been fabulous. I am so grateful in the contract of time that we've had, both for the opportunity from the Junior League of Lake Charles. Neely, thank you for your leadership and what you do for developing leaders in our community. Sarah, thank you for the opportunity and what the Community Foundation of Southwest Louisiana does. And most importantly, Laura, Kay, you are incredible, and just what a gift of 2 hours to really get the insider information of what it means to be an executive director and a leader, and what it means to be a secret sauce of the board member. That it's just so important.
There's so
we're
much
all
to this.
grateful.
It's so much fun. So, anytime I can be of help, please let me know. And thank you all for inviting me.
Thank you for asking us.
Well, everybody have a wonderful evening. Anything that I missed, Sarah and Neely, as we close?
Just a reminder that we will have a survey that we'll send out tomorrow, and we will appreciate your input on, and if you have any questions to have Beverly ask to our guests next week, who will be Willie Mount and Richard Reed, from the perspective of the McNeese Foundation, talking about major gifts. So if you have questions and then any ideas for enhancements of our sessions, we would love to hear them. And
Yes.
Neely, any closing remarks from your end?
Just thank you, Beverly, for another informative webinar. We all look forward to seeing you next week. And I want to especially thank two of our Junior League sustainers, Ms. Kay Barnett and Ms. Laura Leach. Two amazing women. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
5:59, okay?
5:59
Yes.
on the contract of
It's
time.
time,
We're going to
time.
say thank you so
Wow.
much. Have a great week, and hopefully we'll see you next week when we're talking about campaigns and major gifts. You ladies have set the stage perfectly for that discussion. Y'all have a great night. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Football's in the kitchen.